Buonasera a tutti. Good evening, and we are live once again on episode number 22 of What's the Scoop. Tonight, April 28th, 2024, at the end of a very long week. Thank y'all for everyone who tuned in this past week for the dual coverage from K&K Sports Show and Rocky Mountain Sports Network of the NFL Draft 2024 just wrapped up yesterday. Congratulations to all the players who got selected, to all the teams who made picks that are hopefully going to either continue their franchise's success or pivot them from a path of losing to a path of winning going forward. It's been a very exciting few days in the NFL, but also there's still a lot going on in the world of sports outside of football. So we'll be getting into a lot of that. In a few moments, I'm going to be breaking into some news that just came down, and I think it'll be interesting to a lot of my fellow baseball fans out there. So looking forward to covering that with y'all. And if there's anything else, as usual, that I'm not covering that you want to hear about or that you want to engage with, please jump in at any point and let me know, and we'll get that on the screen. This is a show that's very much interactive, as you guys know, and love to see what's going on in your minds with regard to sports. There's a message saying, "Wow, Scoops, 22 shows, congrats!" Thank you so much, and thank you again to everybody who's helped support this over at both K&K and Rocky Mountain Sports Network. Oh, Kenny, all right, thank you. Yes, Kenny from K&K is helping me going forward behind the scenes, so thank you to him for being here and helping me tonight and the weeks going forward. Really appreciate all of that, and excuse me. Good to see some people coming in tonight. Hope everybody's having a nice evening, and looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say. And Kenny's saying, "Good evening, everyone, and you're welcome, Scoops. Have a great show." Thank you very much, bud. And Jody says, "Thoughts on Boone's ejection last week?" Yeah, no, I watched that game, and I mean that umpire, I just didn't really understand what the mindset was. Like I understand if you're like in the moment, you might think that you're hearing something that happened elsewhere, which is fine. That's a human error, but to be told that it was incorrect and then it was somebody else, and to be basically say while it's happening, "I don't care. You're responsible for it. Get out." Again, if he thought that was a player chirping and decided to eject Boone, I guess that's fine, but not fine, but you know what I mean. But he found out that it was a fan, still ejected Boone, and then doubled down on it later on, not even admitting his mistake. I mean, even Jim Joyce, who made perhaps the worst call in MLB history with the Armando Galarraga perfect game, even he admitted his mistake afterward in a very emotional manner. And this guy just stuck to his mess up, and I just really didn't have a lot of respect for that. I love a Boone injection as much as the next guy, but I mean, come on, that was just unnecessary. Also, Jody, while you're on, I just got I don't know if you heard this yet, but prior to Tuesday's game against the Guardians, the Astros are calling up Jody Loperfido. He's not on the 40-man roster, so there'll have to be a roster move made for them or for him. But that first baseman and outfielder is coming up after his hot spring training. So congrats to him on his promotion. And with that, just going to verify something real quick. Just making sure that everything's live on Facebook as well. And if anybody's over there and trying to communicate and I'm not seeing it, please just let me know and I'll make sure to get you on. But yeah, so that's my thought on that. And again, wanted to make sure that when I saw you were on, Jody, want to make sure that you heard about that. Wasn't quite sure what the time frame was on that having been announced versus it starting to circulate. So while we're on the topic of baseball, I'm going to get into for a minute. Seeing no additional comments at this time, I'm going to get into what what just came out in Major League Baseball a few moments before we hit the airwaves tonight. So if you've been following baseball, you probably have heard about the uniform controversy that's been going on within baseball throughout the past few months. And about an hour ago, it was confirmed by ESPN, among others, that the MLB uniform situation from the spring is being addressed. This was according to an MLBPA memo that was obtained by ESPN. The quote was, among others, saying Nike was innovating something that didn't need to be innovated. Goes on to say the changes will happen no later than by the beginning of next season. So this is going to include things like a return to larger lettering on the back of jerseys, remedying mismatched gray tops and bottoms, and addressing the new Nike jerseys' propensity to collect sweat, which many people have made references to and acknowledgments of. The changes are also going to include fixes to the pants, uh, which were widely panned this spring for being see-through. And yes, I know many people who took acknowledgement of that and took notice of that. I'm surprised that before they were released to the public, nobody else was able to do so. But so finally, we have that update, and it's not sure exactly how efficient and how quick those developments will be, but that is coming at least hopefully later this year, but at very least by the beginning of 2025. And that's music to a lot of fans' ears, including mine. Scoop, I have a Yankees question. Thoughts on the Yankees offense these last couple of games? Yeah, one of the things that a lot of people were saying as, the Yankees were, winning like 15, 16 games. I think their record was around 15-8 or somewhere around there, but they were having still inconsistencies with their offense. A lot of the offensive production was coming from guys like Soto and whatnot, and a lot of guys like Torres and Judge, most notably, were really struggling at the plate. And it seems like the last couple days, that's really in a big way started to turn around. It's actually been the first time since 2007, which was the first year I started watching the Yankees, that the Yankees have scored 15 or more runs in back-to-back games, which is what they've done this weekend in Milwaukee. So they're on a historically good stretch the last couple days offensively. It's very nice to see, obviously. And say what you will about Milwaukee and having given up on Corbin Burns to Baltimore in this offseason, but the Brewers are still, the Brewers are still a team. They are 17-10 right now, even after having lost today to New York. So this is a team that came in, right neck and neck with New York in terms of where their records are. So this is not a team that, people are just going into Milwaukee and rolling them over. So that's very impressive. And also the Athletics as another team, that we were talking about, because people, including myself, were very concerned about the fact that New York didn't exactly dominate against Oakland. Oakland has just taken 2 out of 3 in Baltimore from the Orioles, who a lot of people expect to win the division. So some results the last few days that are, I think, promising for the Yankees, both for what they're doing and what teams that they've beaten or teams that they've been at least playing recently have been doing. Clayton says, hey guys, how you doing, Clayton? Good to have you on. Really appreciate it. You guys are always very supportive of all the shows in this sort of interlinked network, and I know we all really appreciate it. Says, man, you guys did a great job for all the shows. Thank you so much. Really, I hope your guys, I don't quite remember what team you root for in the NFL, but I hope your draft was very successful. It was always obviously a very exciting draft. And Jody says, yeah, with Abreu hitting 100, they had to. I think he's referencing the player I mentioned earlier. But, excuse me. Yeah, no, I completely agree that was a much needed, I think will be a much welcome move to their lineup. Is Soto or Judge the face of this team? Still Judge, still has to be Judge, I think. In fact, I don't know if you guys saw this, but I really loved this. 2 days ago, I think it was, somebody, I don't remember exactly who the individual was, but someone in the media basically was asking, just asking Judge, how do you feel about the fact that you're struggling? Do you think you're going to be, able to turn it around one thing or another? And Judge, in his typical, just very, very matter of fact, very man of few words, but also sort of balancing that humility with that confidence, but not, crossing the line of being cocky or anything. He basically just said, I'm still Aaron Judge. And he proceeded to hit a home run yesterday and hit a home run today. So I think that that says, a lot as he, as usual, he's talking with his game and not his mouth. So that's really respectable. I think that if Soto sticks around and if Soto ends up getting, a massive deal to, stay in New York for the long term, it could end up being Soto, or Soto could end up being sort of the 1A to Judge in that regard, at least. But no, it's definitely Judge for now. It's been Judge, and it will continue to be. I know that Soto was the big acquisition this offseason, but especially if he's not, especially if he's only on so far on a 1-year commitment with us, I can't call anyone else the face of the team right now. I definitely think it's possible that that could be an answer that I revise in the coming years, though, depending on how his contract situation plays out. That being said, covering that, having been kind of the last piece of what I was talking about with regard to the jersey situation, which I'm very grateful that that's going to happen. Who says, who is your surprise team in MLB this year? Do you mind clarifying just real quick, someone who is surprising me so far, someone who I think will surprise? Like, I just want to make sure I'm answering your question in the way that's correct for what you're asking. I will hold off on pivoting to NFL real quick. Team as a whole, good or bad? Again, I'm not quite sure if you're asking me about the Yankees. I mean, it's definitely think this is a very good team. I think the lineup is a much more has more ways to beat you, I think, than they've had in years past. There was 1 year, I think it was 2022, I want to say, where I think that the team was more versatile in terms of ways that they could beat you, but then ended up being marred by injuries at the end of the season and getting bounced in. I remember actually being in Game 4 of the ALCS that year in the Houston sweep. But I think that this is probably the team that has the most ways to beat you that teams have had recently. So Carlos Rodon looks like he's coming around. I've seen liking a lot of what I've seen recently from Marcus Stroman. All of this. Team as a whole, I'm surprised isn't playing better are the Dodgers. Oh, okay, got it. I see what you're saying now. And then in terms of a team that's surprising me, I guess so far, I would say, pardon me, I am a little bit surprised that Boston is keeping their head nicely above water. They're 15-13 right now. Definitely thought that they would be much lower. I thought that they would definitely be below Baltimore. I'm sorry, they are below Baltimore. I meant definitely thought they would be below Toronto and below Tampa. Right now, they're obviously it's still early, but right now they're sitting nicely in the middle of the division right now. I think my biggest disappointment, I think anybody's disappointment, sorry to Jody if you're still listening, but I think even you would agree with this, has to be Houston. The fact that they right now are sitting with the second worst record in the American League, only beaten out, if you want to say that, by the 6-22 Chicago White Sox, who they were worse than that. They've actually won their last 2 games against, I want to say it was Tampa. So I think that they've got to be my biggest disappointment right now is Houston in terms of just, what I thought they would be versus now. I'm not surprised that they were eventually going to take a step back, but to go from a perennial World Series favorite, or at least World Series contender, to starting by losing 19 of your first 28 games is, I think, something that a lot of people were not expecting. So on the negative side, that would probably be my pick. Pretty much everybody else, I think, is doing about where I expected them to be. Like you said, I'm a little surprised that the Dodgers are, I guess, not a little bit better. But again, I was the one this offseason saying, temper your expectations. I don't think they're going to run away with this thing. Atlanta is still squarely in the number 1 spot in the NL right now, and that's about what I expected. I am a little surprised that the Dodgers don't have a few more wins, but am I super surprised, for them to be 18-12? Not really. Again, I think that they'll have a little bit of a higher winning percentage at the end of the year, but they're at 600 right now, and if I'd be lying if I said I thought they would be, that much higher than that at the end of the season when the postseason is starting. That's about where I expect them to be, and I think that I still say Atlanta's the better team to me. Pardon me. I think that if you're looking at a team that I think hasn't surprised yet, but I think still could, it's probably it's just still looking a little bit. I think it's still Tampa. Tampa still is a team that I think is better than they've played as right now at 13-16, but they're a team that I think is going to bounce back. So yeah, I think in terms of the different ways I could answer that question, those are probably my answers right now. Um, but coming off of that for the time being, I'm going to pivot over to NFL real quick because, as you guys know, whether or not you followed the content the last few days, the NFL draft was the past few days. I'm not going to belabor that topic too much, merely because, again, if you've been in and out the last few days, you know that we've covered it for about 20 hours the past 3 days. So I know a lot of us are probably a little bit draft fatigued. Um, but I do think that just looking at what happened the last few days, there are teams that I was, think that had a really solid draft. I think the Commanders, starting with my guy Jaden Daniels, and going right down, I think had a very solid draft. I loved what Pittsburgh was doing, starting with the guy that they got in the first round. I think that they have some nice pieces now. I think I already liked their defense and some of their weapons, but I think they continue to build that up, and I think that their structure now around Wilson puts him in a strong position to succeed going forward. And of course, if Justin Fields ends up jumping in as a starter as well at any point, I think that he's got some things to work with as well. But yeah, those are kind of my two big ones outside of Philadelphia. I've already said Philadelphia a few times. Jody says favorite pick by your Eagles. It's really hard for me to pick, just because it felt like every round, it seemed like I was saying I would take a guy, and then they ended up getting him a round later, um, which was just incredible to me. I would probably say Cooper DeJean, merely because he was somebody that I said I was prepared to trade up for in round one and got him at 40th overall. So anytime that happens, you got to be really excited. And also, he's a sort of a flexible corner safety hybrid potential. So both of which are desperate needs of ours and have been for a while. So you're adding DeJean, you're adding our first round pick in Mitchell to a cornerback room that already included guys like Darius Slay. So I think for the first time in a while, I actually feel pretty excited about our secondary, which you definitely need when you're going into teams like Dallas, who always seems to have weapons in the receiving. The Washington Commanders, who jumped in and says and picked Jaden Daniels, who I think is going to be the best prospect out of this draft at QB. And then the Giants, who I'm sure are going to be turning it around sooner rather than later, regardless of whether it's Jones or Locke at QB. And I've got a sneaking suspicion that Locke's going to make more. Take more snaps at QB this season than people expect. But I think either one of those, once you start building up that offensive cupboard, I think you're going to definitely need to have some help in your secondary. And I think Philly addressing that, especially with DeJean and at 40th overall, where I thought that teams could have gotten him in the top 10, was ecstatic with that. And you can see that by going back and looking at my reaction in the draft coverage. In fact, during round one, I think it was during round one, Quinion Mitchell came off the board for Philly. And when I first heard about the pick, I had the sound on for the TV just so I could hear what they were saying. And I jumped up and got so excited about the pick that I forgot for a moment that I had to actually announce it for the draft. So that was just kind of a funny moment that happened on day one. So, but yeah, that would be my answer to that, Jody. And congrats to your Broncos as well. I think you guys had a fantastic draft. The pick of Bo Nix, is one that I was pounding the table for Denver since I was on Denver Bronco Roundup back in February. I think that was the right pick. I made the comp, I think it was yesterday. I think it was on Settle the Scores. That, doesn't matter. I mean, you talk about, if you use like examples like cooking, caviar is a very high-end, very valuable, very expensive, type of food. But just because you have the best of something doesn't mean you wouldn't add it to like a chocolate cake, for example. Just because you have the best of something doesn't mean it's the right fit for what you're doing. And I think that for the fit and for what Denver and Sean Payton want to do, I think that Bo Nix, even though he may not have been the biggest, the most exciting name compared to a Jaden Daniels or compared to a Caleb Williams or compared to a Drake May in some eyes, I think that he fits what they want to do like a glove, and I'm excited to see what he does when Sean Payton turns him loose this coming season. And yeah, as the caption says, yeah, this show is a little bit more flexible in terms of just I really want to get your guys' takes on things and want to just be very interactive with y'all and whatever's on y'all's mind tonight. I've got like I said, I'm talking about the baseball stuff. I'm talking about the NFL draft a little bit, but I'm very much want this to be a show heavily leaned on by or for y'all, and just kind of see where your heads are at and what you guys want to hear about, because I know that there's a lot of people probably who are a little bit, like I said, draft fatigued. I'm able to switch course at any moment if someone's got something they want me to cover that I haven't. My buddy Trevor jumps on and says, "This is the Swifty Hour with Scoops and Kenny. JK, have a great show, buddy." Thank you, Trevor. Thank you for coming on last night. I really appreciate it. And the joke is definitely catching like wildfire. And of course, here we are. My friend Nicole jumps on and says, "This should be Swifty Scoops." Keith, how you doing, buddy? Says Scoops, talk about Shipley, excuse me, hello, and the role you think he can play, please. Yeah, if you asked me, like, if you said, take out, the first two picks in DeJean and Mitchell, Shipley might be my favorite player that Philly drafted the rest of the way. I was kind of surprised that a player of his caliber was available where he was. This is the running back out of Clemson. He was taken in the fourth round, 127. It was one of the better, one of the better athletes coming out of the draft at running back. He was in the 99th percentile for PFF GAS, which is game athleticism score, among college running backs last year, which basically, I mean, it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's an analytic metric that allows you to kind of just compare athleticism for players at different positions in college. He had, like I said, 99th percentile. He was in the absolute, top of the top at that. And that's a lot of guys in this day and age. You talk about a league that is heavily based on speed and heavily based on versatility and being able to be creative offensively. A lot of that ties into your your athleticism and the athleticism of your players, no matter what the position is. So I thought that was a really smart move, getting him out of Clemson, which has been a team that has had some solid offenses in recent years. I think that he's going to be the type of guy who is going to kind of, I think he'll be a good fit for Philly in the fact that he's not going to have to be the bell cow. He's going to be somebody who they can have as like a shifty back in the backfield. Like, on the draft, I called him Shifty Shipley. They can have him as kind of a Robin to the Batman that's going to be Saquon. I think Saquon's going to turn loose for Philly this year. I think he's going to be finally be behind a solid O-line and a team that really does well consistently at developing and maintaining O-lines, which he hasn't had yet. He's going to have the ability to not be sort of the only focal point of the offense, meaning Saquon. Going to have the ability to not be the only focal point of the offense because they got Jalen Hurts back there, who's going to be respected as a QB. And I think having that will allow Shipley to turn loose a little bit as well, because he's going to be put into a role where he can be a supplemental piece where they rely on his strengths and, kind of play those up, as opposed to having to be somebody who's going to be, relied on as an every down back, where maybe some of those things and his lack of a couple of, and a couple of his perceived weaknesses necessarily, where like as I mentioned on the draft, something like the fact that he's not the best pass blocker, even though he's working on improving in that regard, and he's not the strongest in the world in terms of being able to recoil off of tackles and keep going. So as he's building as a power player, I think he'll be able to use his elusiveness rather and quickness to be able to be that zone blocking back without having to be an every down guy because Saquon's shouldering that load. Mr. Ronquillo is saying, "Good evening, Scoops." Good evening, Mr. Ronquillo. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining on. Jody says, Trotter Jr. playing where his dad is really cool. I'm so excited about that. He was somebody who people thought could have gone to Philly in round 2 when they got him in round, I think it was 5. But yeah, once they still needed a linebacker at that position. And I kind of wonder, the fact that they didn't take a linebacker earlier, I kind of wonder if they basically told him, hey, I don't know how much like in other sports. I don't know how much assurances are given earlier in the draft for guys like in the NFL. But I kind of wonder if there was like a little bit of a nudge, nudge, wink, wink that, hey, if you're still on the board in round 5, we're taking you, or something like that. Because there was just so much buzz going there. He fit a need. He's got the pedigree there. It just made a lot of sense for football and other reasons. And yeah, you can bring up the question at any time. Thank you very much for that. But yeah, thank you for the for that. Scoops, who was your biggest surprise as a division leader or tied for the lead in MLB right now? So I talked a little bit earlier about the fact that there's not a ton of surprises for me at this very moment. The Guardians would possibly be that, even though I think that the Guardians roster is better than some people give it credit for. What the reason why I might pick that is just because they were going from such a highly regarded and highly respected, perhaps the number one manager of this generation in this era in Terry Francona, to just, not to disrespect him, but a relative unknown in Stephen Voigt. A lot of people have had him pegged as a future manager when he was playing. But again, he's a first year. He hasn't had really coaching experience in MLB. So maybe just based on that, I wasn't 100% sure what to expect there. But, the Guardians currently have right now the best record in the American League. So the fact that they have responded clearly well and clearly very quickly to that sort of transition in leadership. I think that there's a lot to be said for the players there, and a lot to be said for what Stephen Voigt has clearly seems to have made a positive impact early on in whatever level. Again, I know each team has the managers with different levels of impact and different levels of authority and different sort of priorities in where their hands are more in one area versus another. But I definitely think that whatever they've got, Stephen Voigt, his sort of realm that he's in terms of what he has most control over, it definitely seems to be working because, the numbers speak for themselves, and they actually have a better record on the road than they do at home, which is not something that you see very often. Pardon. And then just looking around elsewhere, if I had to pick somebody else, I mentioned them briefly a moment ago, but maybe Milwaukee, just because usually you don't see a team trade their ace and then still turn around and have a share of the division lead. I think that this is going to be a little bit skewed, just because they have a very surprising split. They actually have more of a split than what I mentioned before. They're 12-4 on the road and 5-6 at home. They have a losing record at home after losing to the Yankees today, and they're 12-4 on the road, which is a 750 winning percentage on the road is very rare in Major League Baseball, and I'm guessing that that's not going to be sustainable. But for what they've done so far, I got to give them their props. Scoops, are you surprised the Marlins are as bad as they are? No, I'm really not. When you have as dysfunctional of an upper level as they do, you can only hide what you are for so long. It's like relationships. You hear that rule about you can only hide who you really are for 3 months, give or take. And I feel like in baseball, when you have crappy management and you have crappy front office, or in any sport, you can only hide how dysfunctional you are for so long. Derek Jeter, who was very respected as a future potential executive and then took over as CEO for the Marlins, ducked out. Kim Ng wanted to stay on, but didn't want to relinquish control, rightfully so, of certain things, ducked out. So now only one who's left there is Bruce Sherman, who has repeatedly been noted as somebody who does not want to increase expenditures into player personnel and things of that nature. And the best outcome that they've had in recent years at the end of a season was when everybody and their mother was able to make the postseason during COVID, and when stadiums were at like 20% because most cities had the rules of you have to be 13 feet away from the next person, and you have to all this other stuff. So yeah, I mean the Marlins are one of the worst managed organizations in MLB right now. They're up there with organizations I think like Colorado, and others. And it's not something that I think is going to get better anytime soon, unfortunately, for Marlins fans. They just brought in somebody named Rachel Balchevek, who was a minor league manager for the Yankees, I think, with the Tampa Tarpons. And she's the new minor league player development head, I think, is the title. So hopefully that'll help. But no, it looked like they had something good going there when Jeter was taking over and some of those other guys were up there, Gary Denbo and company. But it just has been absolutely marred by the sort of the seemingly misguided arrangement of priorities by Bruce Sherman and his head guys over there. And unfortunately, as commanders and other teams in sports fans know all too well, if you don't have it right at the top, it's going to really be hard to get it right down from down the line from there. So no, I'm not surprised that it eventually came back to bite them in the what. Mr. Osborne says, "Howdy, Scoops. How you doing, Mr. Osborne? It was nice speaking to you earlier. I appreciate that you were on the last few days of the coverage, and I'm glad to hear that things are doing better for you and yours. So appreciate you making it on tonight. And yes, I pronounced it right this time. I didn't read it and think of Roy Orbison for the first time. So I'm working on it. I'm doing okay. So is Allie the Labrador. I'm glad to hear that. Continuing to keep both of y'all in my prayers. So thank you for the update. I'm very grateful to hear that. Pardon me. Comments are clear. Okay. So having no further comments at this time, I'm going to jump over and talk a little bit more about what we were saying regarding the baseball earlier. Spoke a little bit about what was going on with the Yankees, who kind of had a bit of an up and down past few days, and then proceeded to drop a 30 spot the last 2 days on Milwaukee, who, as I mentioned, was 7-10. Is 7-10 now after that last couple days against New York. Going forward with them, and we've been talking a little bit. There's been some injury history that they've been dealing with recently. DJ LeMahieu had gotten banged up somewhat, and he had a setback this past week rather. So he's been a little bit held up in his injury recovery. However, there was some better news that came out today that offseason acquisition John Birdie, who came over at the last minute from Miami. Ironically, we just spoke about them. He is going to be starting a rehab assignment with Double-A Somerset that actually began today, according to Brian Hoke. So that will hopefully allow him to be making more of a fast track back to the lineup. Jason Dominguez, who's been out since last season due to his elbow, he had Tommy John. He has increased his throwing distance to 135 feet. So that is obviously a step in the right direction for him as well. Hopefully that continues to be track toward his return that hopefully can get a little bit more expedited from where we originally thought it could be. And then LeMahieu, as I mentioned before, still dealing with the edema in his right foot, was shut down from baseball activity for a week, according to Eric Boland of Newsday. And so he's going to be not having any updates from his progress toward a return until the first week of May. 2 NFL questions when ready from Kurt and Michael. Let's go. Thank you, Kenny. I'm ready for them whenever you've got them. Scoopsy, are the Eagles the favorites in the NFC East this year, and is their head coach on the hot seat? Put me down for a double yes. I think they have to be the favorites after that draft. I mean, they were a team that had the first seed in the NFC for a while until they just came unglued at the end of the season. Then they replaced their coordinators with 2, I think, fantastic hires in Vic Fangio and Kellen Moore. I think those were really solid for not only their expertise, but also for the personnel that they have. I think they hired guys who are good for the guys that they have in their locker room and are not going to try and build the guys in their locker room to fit a forced scheme on them. I think that when you have a guy like Steichen who motioned his offensive players in LA and back in Dallas at a much higher clip when Philadelphia was last in the league at 32 and by a decent margin in that type of usage, I think that means a lot is coming their way in terms of a rebound there. Is their head coach on the hot seat? I think you have to be in Philadelphia when you're coming off of rebuild staff. You're coming off of nailing a draft by pretty much all um, objective accounts, if you want to say. I think that he definitely has to be considered on the hot seat. You also have guys who are very well-known names in, if you want to call it the free agent market. You've got guys like, obviously, Bill Belichick is out there. You've got, I think Mike Vrabel is still out there available. I know that Brian Flores, I'm pretty sure, is the D coord for, I want to say, either Pittsburgh or Minnesota right now. But you've got guys with head coaching experience who I think Philly would be very interested in a situation where they are rapidly coming up on the potential for their window to be open shut at any moment. So when you have these windows open, you got to capitalize. So I don't think that they would be averse to making a change if they feel like they need to. So yeah, I definitely think Sirianni's on the hot seat, but I think that he'll be given the chance to at least get through a chunk of the season, if not the full season, since Lurie's not really one to fire coaches during the season. The only one I can think of where he did that was Chip Kelly a few years ago in 2015, and that really wasn't mid-season. That was like with a game to go. I think they brought in Pat Shermer as the interim, who ended up ultimately becoming the head coach for the Giants a year or so later. So I don't think that it's going to be for a while. Excuse me. I don't think it's going to be a move that if they did make, I don't think it would be until the very end of the season if they somehow got eliminated. But so yeah, I think it would be, basically, I think it's a double yes. I think that if I had to rank my top 3 or 4 teams in the NFC, I think Philly would definitely be on it. But I also do think that if you're in Philadelphia, there's no if you want me to revive one of your old quotes, there's no holly jolly this coming season if they don't start out on the on a hot streak. There's not going to be any second guessing, I don't think, about making a change if Lurie and Roseman deem it necessary. But especially not with an offseason that they've had, finally bringing in a sure number 1 running back, bringing in 2, I think, of the best coordinators you could have found for what they were trying to do, and then I can't find a flaw with their draft class. I've looked multiple times, and I'm like, how do I feel about each of these players? I really can't find an area where I would have done something that much different than what they did. And he also, Howie Roseman also made the record for trades in the draft. So I mean, he deserves some credit for that as well. He never takes a minute off when it comes to draft time or when it comes to the ability to be making moves to make his team better. So, he took a lot of ire and a lot of, negativity and criticism from fans for a while. Some of it very much deserved, but I think he's a lot closer right now to being on, having a statue of himself in the field than he is to losing his job. Kurt says, great scoops. The head coach free agent market next year is very good. I agree on that. See, yeah. And that's just with right now. I mean, you and I both know that things can make a lot of, or changes can be made, very quickly in the NFL, especially in this day and age. You never know if a team like LA perhaps lets go of a Sean McVay, or if Sean McVay walks away for a season and then decides to come back. Obviously, we're talking about future stuff. I'm not necessarily saying this as an Eagles potential, but I'm just saying that, you never know how quickly things can change in that. So there might be a name that ends up becoming a possibility that we aren't even talking about right now, was the main point that I was making. Mr. Osborne says the Eagles did fill a lot of holes. Yeah, I can't remember leaving a draft thinking that, Philly, or really anybody that I was following, really filled every single need that they had. And I genuinely feel that way about Philadelphia, especially now that which I didn't know when it first happened, but now that I know that Cooper DeJean can be utilized as a safety and not just a corner, because I was a little surprised that they held off on addressing safety. But now that I see, like, it feels like he's going to be utilized a little bit in that regard, or at least could be. Yeah, I'm really lacking for a place to really be super concerned about their roster right now. Mr. Ronquillo says, which NFL teams had the worst NFL draft class and the best NFL draft class? Best, I'll go with the 3 that I've already mentioned. Not to be a parrot, but I'll go with the 3 that I've mentioned so far, which are Pittsburgh, Washington, and Philly. I absolutely love, when you get my favorite quarterback like Washington did, and then double down by adding in a bunch of other players that I think either were at least great players or at least great value for where they were selected. You got guys like Dejon Newton, who I did not think was going to fall to the second round. You got Mike Sen still, who I think, or I'm sorry if I'm butchering that, but getting him in the middle of the second round, even though I said I wouldn't take him at 22, did not think he'd be available at 50. You got Luke McCaffrey at 100, which I think some people expected him to go earlier. And then you got a lot of needs addressed on the defensive side, and you picked up a tight end who you hopefully believe can replace what Logan Thomas was for you for so long. So I think they had a fantastic draft. Congrats to Coach Brislin. I'm still annoyed that you got ended up with Jaden Daniels, but that's neither here nor there. And then Pittsburgh, this started off with Troy Fontenot at number 20, which shout out to Troy Fontenot. He and his pick ended up, I'm pretty sure, being the reason that I won the mock draft contest in round 1. So shout out to him for backing me there. But in all seriousness, then you got Peyton Wilson at 97. Was a little more annoyed by this because I remember saying that I wanted Peyton Wilson to be drafted by Philadelphia before we ended up getting Trotter. But Chasen McCormick, I think, is a solid pick. Zach Frazier was a center, another guy that I thought Philly could have gotten. So I thought that they had an absolute fantastic draft as well. I think that they beefed up some guys on defense, and they added a lot of support on that line for Russell Wilson and their running game as well. So I think not just Russell Wilson, but I think Najee Harris as well is going to see a boost this year from the moves that they made in the draft. And then I already talked about Philadelphia. So those are my 3 teams that I think had a positive, like the most positive drafts. A team that I think had a bit of a flop in the draft. I got to think about this one for a moment. Because also there's some teams that just didn't have as much in the way of capital, so it's also hard for me to hold that against certain teams. Although I'll admit, and I'm sorry to my grandfather for this, I didn't love what Cleveland did. But again, like I said, based on some of the trades they made, they didn't have as many opportunities. So that was part of the factor there. I think probably, and again, this was more off of one pick than anything else, but I still am racking my brain for the Michael Penix Jr. pick at number 8 from Washington for Atlanta. I understand as much as anybody from seeing what happened with Wentz and Hurts and going back to, Foles and Wentz and all this stuff. But so I understand the need for consistent QB, pipeline, all of that. But at number 8, when I think you had a much bigger need at defensive line, I think you had a much bigger need at corner, which they didn't even – I thought corner might be their biggest need, and they didn't even draft a corner. And so I didn't understand that. They took 3 defensive linemen, or 4 defensive linemen, excuse me, which, good for them for that. But in a draft that had and they had 3 corners in this draft that they could have dropped back from 8 well into the teens. Of course, they didn't know this at the time, but they could have drafted well into the teens and still gotten a top corner. And this was just after you paid all that money to Kirk Cousins. And I'm a Kirk Cousins fan, and I think that was a good pickup for them. That might be, and again, I know I'm reading it heavily off of one pick and the rest being off of the lack of a selection of a corner. I didn't like Atlanta's draft all that much. So if I were to pick someone other than Cleveland, I probably would actually say Atlanta was probably my worst draft. Let me see. If Cousins gets hurt, the Falcons GM looks like a genius. Otherwise, I agree, Scoops. Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. But if I'm gonna make a move like that, I feel like that's more of a move you make again on a day 2, maybe. There were a good number of quarterbacks who, obviously the top 6 went in those top 12 selections, but there were a good number of quarterbacks who people thought could have gone on day 2 who fell well into day 3 and even in some cases as undrafted free agents. So I do agree with you that taking a quarterback still looks like a good move in the event that he gets hurt. But again, I feel like if you're picking top 8, you're rarely picking top 8. And if you're picking top 8, there's usually a reason for that. And usually the optimal response to that is to do whatever it takes to not be picking in the top 8 again next year. And I feel like one of the 2 positions that really could have helped with that, they were in prime position to get, a potential future All-Pro at that position just based on what we saw out of college. And not only did they pass that up for a QB, which is one thing, but then to not address it at all in the next 6 rounds, that was, I think, what makes it that much worse for me. I might, if it was just based off of picking Penix at 8, I might have a little bit of grace for them based off of, like you said, but then to take a need that was pretty universally considered one of their biggest and not address it at all when they had multiple opportunities to do so, that's part of it for me, and that's why I've got Atlanta there. Nicole says Swifty Scoops 24-hour marathon featuring me. Let's do it. 24 hours. You and I for 24 hours. I'm curious to see how many of those, how much of that airtime is actually me speaking. Two Italians for 24 hours about Taylor Swift. That's going to be an interesting show. I don't know if we're going to get 5,000 views or 5. But Kurt says 6 QBs in first round next year. What 3 will have the best NFL careers? I love this question because again, and this is not an original thought by any stretch, but obviously it's not just about the QB; it's about where he goes. And you're going to love the fact that I'm going to say this, Kurt. But the first one that I think of is going to be your Denver Broncos with Bo Nix. I love that fit. I said that I love that fit 2.5 months ago when I was on DBR, and I stayed with it. That was the guy that I would have taken if I were Denver at 12. I know that there were some people who wanted them to jump back a little bit, but again, I think Vegas was taking him at 13, or potentially New Orleans could have taken him at 14, depending on how much they didn't believe in Derek Carr, or a team potentially jumping up. So suffice it to say, I don't think that jumping back would have allowed them to still get Bo Nix if that was a guy that they wanted. And you heard him talk about. Kurt, if you haven't seen it, I'd suggest going on to. I think it was the Pat McAfee show, which is one of my favorite shows to begin with. But in specifically talking about or going to the clip of, I think it was Bill Belichick speaking with Sean McVay, Sean Payton, and talking a little bit about what he saw when he was evaluating them, but also what the analytics guys saw. I know I don't mean to make your ears bleed, but it is 2024. So I recommend going to listen to that because I think that they both did an excellent job of just encapsulating everything that I think that they saw in Bo Nix, and a lot of what made me like Bo Nix in terms of a fit for Denver. So Bo Nix would be one of them. I'm not necessarily ranking these, but he would be one of my 3. JJ McCarthy, some of that's a little bit more intangible than anything else. I think that he's got the ability to be really successful in Minnesota. He's not one of my favorite QBs just as a prospect, but I think that he went to the best situation possible for him in Minnesota. So I'd put him there. I really like the fact that he's got those weapons around him. I think Kevin O'Connell's a good offensive coach for him. I think his personality style fits Minnesota. They got that whole Minnesota nice culture up there, both on and off the field. And he's, one of his highest marks that he got was for his personality and his just sort of his leadership. So I think that's a solid fit. I look forward to seeing how that works out. So McCarthy to Minnesota would be my second. And third, my gut wants to say Jaden Daniels just because, again, I was a Jaden Daniels fan coming out the draft. I'm still reluctant to see the fact that, because we haven't seen Washington really develop a consistent winning QB during my lifetime and keep him in there. So I'm a little reluctant to say him there, but if they get this right offensively, coaching wise, then I think that would be probably my third, just because I'm a huge Jaden Daniels fan. But I'm trying to think because I don't think it's going to be Michael Penix. I don't think it's going to be Drake May, just because, again, I don't think I think New England has to show me that they can draft and develop offense still. That's nothing against Coach Mayo, nothing against anybody up there, other than the fact that Bill Belichick, the executive, left them in a crap position in terms of offensive personnel compared to what Bill Belichick, the coach, was able to do successfully on defense for 20 some odd years. So that would probably be my 3, because again, I've said before, I'm not a huge fan of the Caleb Williams pick at number 1. That isn't the pick that I would have made. Let's go with those 3 for me for right now. Let's go with Nix, McCarthy, and Jaden Daniels. And again, part of that is I'm just going off the top 6 because, again, I haven't really looked a ton into some of those much later guys that went. One position for the oh, hello, we're jumping around. Kurt says, "Yes, let's go. Knicks is a tremendous fit with Peyton." Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. And remember, Kurt, we talked about it the other day. Knicks and Knicks this coming week. We're going to get a Knicks and Knicks show. Let's do it. Looking forward to seeing it. And congrats to you guys on the win today. I'm not a fan of either New York or Philadelphia in NBA, but that was a really exciting game. Mr. Ronquillo says, "I was disappointed, or sorry, one position for the Broncos. I was disappointed that they didn't draft was a tackle since Garrett Bowles." Um, I'm not sure what you're. I just don't know Garrett Bowles like that, so I'm not 100% sure what you're referring to there. I was a little surprised by the fact they didn't get a tight end. I know that was something that I kept hearing from Broncos people was something that the people wanted out of him. Um, but we'll see how that goes. Uh, Ms. Heater, good to see you, Miss Pearl. I hope you're doing well. Says not a fan of Williams. I truly wish him well, but he might be a so QB in the end. Does that mean so? Great to see you. I hope you're having a nice weekend, and thank you so much for coming on tonight, and obviously for all the support that you've provided for the shows for all this time. Says, yeah, again, I'm not a fan of Williams, and like you said, I don't necessarily. Um, I don't root against quarterbacks coming out of the draft either. I'm just again was not a player that I would have selected if I were picking number one overall, or if I were in the position that the Broncos or the Bears ended the season in. The process for me throughout the offseason wouldn't have ended in selecting him number one. Keith says, "Scooped, would you embrace a major Eagles logo and uniform redesign as a asking as a Broncos fan?" Um, One thing I really miss, is using more of those, so some of the older style uniforms. I love our more, traditional, the black uniforms. Um, I They made a change recently with regard to the lettering, with regard to the logo, and I wasn't wild about that. It was relatively small changes, but they were just ones that I'm like, "I don't think this was necessary." Um, and I'm, excuse me. The one the one change I would not revert to if they went back to something historical. I would not bring back those blue and yellow Cheerio box looking uniforms that look like those NASCARs that were represented by Cheerios. Uh, I could do without seeing those every week. I'll say that. But yeah, I'd rather like a lot of the uniforms we've used recently. But my favorite ones are, like I mentioned, the black ones, and then the traditional helmets. I know that a lot of people love the Kelly Green, and I'm not saying I don't, but those are my second favorite. As a Giants fan, I miss the silver in the Eagles uniform. Yeah, it's pardon me. The color schemes in terms of like I wouldn't make all that many alterations in terms of um, the color schemes and how they utilize them with regard to the helmets. I love the fact that the helmet logo itself, I definitely wouldn't change. Where you've got the eagle, but you've got the going up into the wings, which for those of you who don't know, the wings are supposed to represent an E. Yeah, the feathers are supposed to represent an E. Um, which I'll be honest, did not realize until several years of being an Eagles fan later. But I absolutely love that logo. So that I would not change, but I could see them tinkering a little bit with the uniforms, but not anything significant. I like Ms. Heater says, I like the throwback uniforms, not the others. Yeah, no, I'm interested in some potential, like maybe a few alterations. Like if you could, like I said, bring back some more of the black uniforms, or if you want to try something utilizing the silver as a more prominent color, that could potentially be interesting. But I've seen them try and do a couple I don't know if it was Color Rush or what it was, but they did these uniforms a couple years ago that I just thought did not look like something that represented what I thought Philadelphia sports, like, I don't know, it just didn't vibe for me. But definitely not as bad as some of the teams like the Seattle Seahawks and Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where you just look like a Crayola marker. I'm just like, okay, no, this was not designed well at all, in my opinion. Or at least depending on what they were going for, I definitely don't think that it was something that it came out the way that they were hoping for. But um, yeah, so that's my thoughts on that. But I would be curious to see what the opportunities are. If that is something that is considered, I'd be curious to see what some of the possibilities would look like. Pardon me. Okay, appreciate it, Kenny. Thank you very much. Um, But yeah, no, Miss here, I agree with you. Ms. Roy Osborne says the Broncos haven't drafted a tackle since 20. I think that means 2017. I believe is when Bowles got drafted. I could be wrong. Oh, okay, got it. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's ever a bad idea to draft a tackle. In fact, speaking of tackles, I'll mention Philly earlier today agreed to a deal with longtime Jets offensive tackle Mekhi Becton. So obviously he didn't pan out exactly as they wanted in New York, but I think bringing him over to, as they say, Stoutland University and Coach Jeff Stoutland, our offensive line coach, who's considered one of the top in the NFL, right up there with Callahan and guys like that. I'm very curious what he'll do. They're trying to develop him as our swing tackle. So if that works out, that could be an absolute steal. And I know that also came out a little while ago that John Ross, the longtime uh, Cincinnati wide receiver, who was the holder of the combine 40-yard dash record at I believe 4.23 before it was broken this year by James Worthy. John Ross, that wide receiver who had retired for a period of time, is trying to make a comeback, and is in doing so, he is taking a workout and a visit with the Philadelphia Eagles as well. So we've got one guy coming in Becton and another guy potentially coming in John Ross. So two interesting names that I heard today. So I'll be curious to see how that develops as we start to get into things like mini camps, OTAs, training camp, and the ultimate, the preseason games. Which actually, I'm going to throw this question out to the chat for those of you who follow NFL. Get some of your opinions on this. We heard some speculation this coming week. I don't know how much of it is speculation versus actually got traction, but I'm curious what y'all think about the possibility of going to 18 games in the regular season and potentially dropping yet another preseason game. So going to two preseason games and an 18-game regular season. I'm curious what y'all's thoughts are on that for those of you who follow the NFL, because I found that rather intriguing, because I think that, excuse me, I can see some reasons why it makes sense. That being said, I can also understand some of the arguments for people who believe that it poses a greater injury risk, because guys in the NFL or guys in the preseason are typically not going 100%, especially not in the first couple weeks. But you also could potentially make the argument that jumping right into the actual season, guys, not really a lot of starters are playing in the preseason to begin with. It's mostly for those last couple of players trying to make the team, and all it does is pose an injury risk anyway for something that doesn't even count. So I could see it both ways. And yeah, Kenny is kind of saying a little bit of that, saying I like it. No one plays in. I think he was saying that nobody plays in the preseason anyway. Ms. Hita says, not a fan. They need the preseason to test out players. Yeah, so I can see both sides of that. Not 100% sure which one I would be more adhering to at this point. Mr. Ronquillo says, love NSL. Excuse me, love less NFL preseason games. Sorry, guys. About 21 hours of draft and far fewer than that of sleep is catching up to me, I guess. I'm kidding, of course. But besides Daniels, was there any player you were very upset went to a rival? So in the moment, I wasn't thrilled about losing out on Tyler Nubin. But that being said, the way that it ultimately ended up, I was fine with it. I'm still, I still wish he hadn't gone to New York, but good for them. They definitely needed him too. And we ended up with Cooper DeJean, which again, you saw how excited I was about that if you watched the draft coverage. So yeah, wasn't thrilled to see him go there, but and then I guess the other one possibly would be I'm blanking on his last name. I think it's Nealand, that edge that went to Dallas that I really liked, that I talked about with Trevor and a few others. I think Nealand was his name. Him, I wasn't thrilled went to Dallas, but again, defensive end was not a position that we were in desperate need of. So, those would be my two picks. But again, that's just first world problem type of thing at this point, because again, I can't be griping about too much about what Philly was able to accomplish. Yeah, you got DeJean and Mitchell, you're fine. LOL. Yeah, Kenny, like I said, I'm really only Okay. I think he's asking or answering the question for from before. Yeah, I can see for sure as him going to the Raiders not being the most exciting thing for Broncos fans. The question for me is going to be getting him the ball because that they didn't make more of a push to get one of those top QBs was surprising to me. And again, I'll reiterate what I said before, which I'm pretty sure I've said 100 times, but I do believe that Bo Nix, had he not been picked up by Denver, I do believe he was going at 13 to Las Vegas.
Good evening, everybody. We lost Scoops. Don't know what happened there. He must have had some internet problems. We'll give him a couple minutes on to come say goodbye to everybody. I want to thank everybody for Scoops. If he doesn't make it back on, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Miss Pearl, Roy, Kurt, Keith. Uh, let's see who else we had here. We had Trevor. We had Nicole. Jody was in earlier. So thank you, everybody, for joining on What's the Scoop. Hi, Miss Pearl. Yeah, he's having some internet issues, I'm sure. It happens. Hopefully he'll jump back on. I'm going to give him a couple more minutes. Definitely appreciate everybody joining us tonight. Scoops' first schedule change show is now Sunday, 9 p.m. Eastern time. Couple things we got on K&K this week. We're doing a Knicks show, Kurt and I. When Kurt and I get together and talk Knicks, it's a show, even if you're not an NBA fan or a Knicks fan, you're going to want to come and see because it's going to be fun times. And I think Scoops is coming back, so we'll have him say goodbye to everybody. Scoops, are you there? Scoops is still having some difficulties. We'll see if he can get on. Thank you, Miss Pearl. The draft show was fun for us as well. Absolutely. It was a blast and can't wait to do it next year. I'm going to work on it, everybody. And there's Scoops. I'm going to work on it, everybody, to get to Lambeau Field. So I'm going to say good night, everyone, and I'm going to pass it back to Scoops. Good seeing everybody.
Kenny, I can't thank you enough. My apologies, y'all. Technical difficulties jumped up unexpectedly, but I am still here to answer a few last-minute questions. Again, I apologize for that. John M. is invited to try out for Broncos. Yeah, excuse me. Thanks for holding that down, Kenny. I appreciate that. Again, my apologies about that sort of short circuit just then. But seeing no more comments, I will say again, like I said, thank you, Kenny, for your help tonight. I think this worked out really well, and I can't wait to see how it goes going forward. And everyone who was involved in the comments, thank you all so much. I was really grateful for all the engagement. I was excited to answer all your questions. We had a lot of people on tonight. Thank you guys a lot. It's the 22nd episode, so I'd be remiss if the people who love making jokes about my Taylor Swift fandom didn't if I didn't sign off with saying, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling episode 22. Philly made pick 22 the other day. So the 22 is all around. So I'll throw in a little Taylor Swift thing there. But do highly recommend going to listen to her new album if you haven't already and if you like that type of music. But in all seriousness, thank you all so much, everybody. Congrats to everyone who had whose teams had great drafts this week. And for now, it's baseball season. And then before you know it, football's back. So I will see you next week. Reminder that this show going forward is going to be on Sundays, 9 p.m. Eastern time. And my show over on Rocky Mountain Sports Network, Settle the Scores, Colorado Rockies centric, is going to be now back on Fridays, 10:30 Eastern, 8:30 Mountain time. Now that the draft coverage has been concluded. So I'll see you on Friday night, regular Scoop time, regular Scoop channel. And thank you once again. And Nicole Gizzy saying we love you too, guys. And with that,